Okay, Chair, we're live.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone to today's meeting of the Learning and Skills Scrutiny Committee. We've got a single item of business on the agenda, which is to look at the consultation report on the proposed closure of Llanbedr Church in Wales School. I just need to go through the formalities before we get on to that. So could I ask whether there are any apologies for this meeting?
I've received 3 apologies, Chair, from County Councillors Claire Mills, Amanda Jenner and Tim Van Rees, who's on other council business.
Thank you, Wyn. Does anyone else have any other apologies that they are aware of? I've just been messaged by Councillor Lucy, who is having problems with technology. If she's unable to connect, could that be logged as apologies as well, Wyn, please?
Shall I try and call her in? And Councillor Cath is also trying to contact me, so I may try and bring them both in. Otherwise, I'll put them in as apologies, Chair.
Thanks very much. In which case, I now go on to item 2, disclosures of interest. Does anyone have any disclosures of interest that they wish to make in respect of today's business? No. And finally, can I receive a disclosure of any party whips which are prohibited under section 78(3) of the Local Government Measure 2011? By silence, can I take it that no one has received a party whip? Please state if you have. Okay, thanks very much, colleagues. I'm now going to pass across to Councillor Phil, the portfolio holder, just to briefly introduce the officers that are here today to provide responses to our questions on the proposals in respect of Llanbedr Church in Wales School.
Sorry, Chair, just struggling to get off mute then. Apologies. Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Chair. I'd just like to request just a clarification in the local member report and that's gone to the local member comment that's gone to Cabinet in the published papers. It discusses the discussion on scrutiny. I just wondered, is there any discussions being had with scrutiny and the local member yet? It just seems peculiar that that's referred to already, that what's stated by scrutiny.
I have not read that report, but
no problem.
My suspicion would be that it's been written in anticipation on the basis that the deadline for local member submissions was before this meeting.
Scrutiny, okay. Chair, is a standard item that I've noticed in the reports, in the draft report, which comes to us, which actually then will be an appendix, which will be the comments from this committee to the Cabinet after today's meeting.
Just strange that it's reference to within the Cabinet report that's already been written by Councillor John Morris. But anyway, that doesn't matter. We'll get into it's just something that I've
Emma,
recognised now.
I believe you want to come in to clarify something.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The wording that's contained in the local member elements under section 6.1 of the report, the second paragraph, if you look at the final sentence there, it says this is highlighting the many responses and the Scrutiny Committee's report. But the Scrutiny Committee have not written their report yet, to my knowledge, because we're just about to start the scrutiny on the matter.
I think that's a discussion with the local member rather than with the committee. We've not discussed anything in relation to what we're reporting today.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to clarify that, just so it's appropriate. Obviously, that local comment isn't in the report that's in front of us in this pack today. But I'd just like to thank you for the introduction to the paper, Chair, and thank those who have responded to the consultation, and thank officers for putting it together. But as usual, I think the important part of this meeting is to get the comments from scrutiny on the report itself, rather than to hear too much from myself or officers. We will address the concerns as you bring them up, if that's appropriate, Chair. So I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Phil, but I had asked you to introduce the officers that will be with us today for the members of the public.
Got Councillor, got Marianne Evans, Lynette Lovell, Director of Education, Emma Palmer, Head of Transformation. We have got Hayley Smith, ALN, I believe. We've got Mary Thomas from Finance. We've got Sarah Cristoforo from HR. Just looking along there. Have I missed anybody? I think that's it, but I'm sure if required, officers can introduce themselves. I've got Irene Towns as well. Sorry, I did see it. There was a smiling face. I'd missed this somewhere. So Irene Towns here as well. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Phil. Lynette, is there anything you wish to say very briefly before we start asking questions of you?
No, Chair. Happy to go ahead into questions. All the papers have been before you, and so no introduction to the paper. I think we're happy to, to take your questions.
Thank you for that. Can I remind colleagues that we are not in Teams today, so we don't have a hands up function. So if you could use the hand signals within Teams itself, or put a request in the chat, I'll come to you in turn. Lynette, I think whilst members gather their thoughts, there's a couple of things that I'd like just quickly for clarification before we get into the detail. I've seen various figures floating around the capacity and numbers of pupils at the schools that may be being used to send pupils to. Could you clarify for us the capacity and number of vacant spaces in each of the Powys schools that may be considered? And can you also clarify how many of those spare spaces are in years 1 to 6? Because from my understanding, particularly of the Llangattock figures, a lot of the spare capacity is actually in the nursery class rather than formal education.
Thank you, Councillor Peat. Yes, I've seen some of the emails going around this week in terms of capacity. That Marianne is best placed to answer that question.
Okay, I'll start off. So in terms of Crickhowell Primary School, capacity of 230, currently 188 on roll, so there's 41 available places at that school currently. Llangattock, it's got 121 place capacity with 103 on roll currently, so there's 18 places there. Llangynyder has a capacity of 147 with 112 on roll, meaning there's a capacity of 35 places. Then those are in the cluster, so those are the Powys schools. We've also got one school as well, so Llangors. There's pupils from Llanbedr who are closer to Llangors, so we've included those as well. Llangors is actually full at the moment. In terms of the way the schools structure their classes, each of the schools, that information is in the consultation report. But you will see that Crickhowell CP School has 7 classes, but they've actually got 8 classrooms. Llangynyder have 4 classes, but they have 5 classrooms. Llangattock is particularly full, 4 classrooms, so all the classrooms are being utilised in those schools.
Okay, so those figures do suggest that we have enough space there to move pupils into. We'll come back to that
yes,
in more detail.
Yeah. Can I just add? So overall, in the catchment, there's currently sufficient capacity, and we've also looked at, if you look at the projections, in particular the finance projections, again, there's increased capacity in future because of the numbers are currently decreasing. So currently 91 places currently available, but projected 2023 according to the finance projections, that will increase to 141.
Thank you for that. Councillor Jake.
Thank you, Pete. Can I just ask a supplementary on that? And then I've got a bit of a statement and a series of questions that are tied in with that. But Marianne, something also has been raised about the requirement or the desire to move pupils from a Church in Wales school to make places available at another Church in Wales school, which potentially makes the argument moot about there is capacity over a range of schools. Could you just clarify the, if you like, the legal position for us, and then just touch upon the numbers so we can see how many we feel might be accommodated in moving from this school to another Church in Wales school?
Yes, no problem. So Llangattock is a Church in Wales school, and it's the only Church in Wales school in the cluster apart from Llanbedr. Just to inform you as well, when we started the process back in the spring of last year, there was an error in the capacity calculation for Llanbedr on the council's annual return to Welsh Government. We have to return a capacity information every year, which meant that the original capacity that we went out and is published in the consultation document was 144. But once that error had been spotted, the capacity was recalculated and it's 121. And an addendum was issued at that stage to all stakeholders who'd originally had the consultation document to outline the issue. It is true there isn't sufficient capacity in Llangattock for all the pupils in Llanbedr, and we've been very clear about that. So in terms of the legal position, we aren't with regard to the code. With regard to the school organisation code, it's advised that local authorities or provide the same kind of places for, say, Welsh medium schools or for faith schools. It's not an actual requirement to provide like for like, and it also says that should there be, sometimes it's not value for money to continue to provide the same like for like. So on that basis, we understand that is an issue. However, we do say parents can apply for any school, can't they? They can apply for a place in any school. And we've had this issue in with other proposals, whereby if a parent wishes to choose a Church in Wales place and say there isn't a place available in Llangattock locally, then the council currently in its home to school transport policy doesn't provide transport to denominational provision anyway, but we would be able to use discretionary powers on a case-by-case basis for those pupils currently in Llanbedr schools, should they wish to be transported to a Church in Wales school. So that's something that we've done for the Castle Corinion proposal, and it's something we will be proposing here as well.
Jake, I'll come back to you more detail, but we've moved into a particular area, so I'd like us to explore this before we move on to the next things that you're going to raise. You've just told us that Llangors is full. Am I right in thinking that there is a school in Brecon that is the next nearest Church in Wales school?
There is a school in Brecon, so the closest would be Llangors. Yes, it's currently full this year. However, that doesn't mean to say that it'll be full in following years. There's a school in Brecon, so Prior is in Brecon, and then the closest Church in Wales provision is actually in Abergavenny. That's the closest for this area.
How much
we do realise that Llangors and Brecon are. Go on.
I was going to say, how much spare capacity is there in Brecon?
Brecon is also very close to capacity. So
in forcing our pupils out of county for Church in Wales provision, what about the Abergavenny school?
I wouldn't say it's forcing pupils out of county, but the Abergavenny school is also close to capacity. So there is an issue around Church in Wales places generally in those three schools. So that's currently, that doesn't mean that it'll be the same in the future.
So I'm looking at the current pupils who have, in many cases, made a choice for a Church in Wales provision. 25% of them are going to be able to retain that provision. Leave aside the school's code. That doesn't sit well in relation to the Equalities Act, given that religion is a protected characteristic.
It is a protected characteristic, and I'll stick by what we've stated in the impact assessment around, consideration of home to school transport, free transport should anybody wish to go to a Church in Wales school.
But there isn't a Church in Wales school to go to. You've just said that the 3 Church in Wales schools are at or near capacity. You've said there's a number of spare spaces at Llangattock, but not enough to cover more than about a quarter of the existing pupils.
Oh, there isn't, and that's factually correct.
Margaret, you want to come in?
Sorry, yes. It was really on the transport of pupils who would possibly be able to obtain a place in the Church in Wales school. Does that cover younger siblings who are not yet in school and wouldn't be in school when their older brother or sister went to the Church in Wales school?
In accordance with the admissions policy, so if a parent can apply for a place in any school, and if a place is available, the child can have that place. Once the child is in school, if they have siblings that are following them, when the parent makes an application for their siblings, then they're considered on their own merit. And if there's no space in the school, then the oversubscription criteria kicks in, and having a sibling in the school is one of those criteria. So they would be allocated a place and considered, and the oversubscription criteria would be considered.
Would they be eligible for transport to that school?
They'd be eligible for transport to their closest school. As I said previously, we will consider and use the discretionary powers within the home to school transport policy to consider whether if anybody wanted to transport to a faith school that's further away.
Do you want to come back again, Margaret?
No, okay. Thank you.
I think, Marianne, I think we've highlighted one of the bones of contention within the school transport policy as opposed to the reorganisation, and that is that we are not looking closely at the impact on faith schools of the school transport policy. And that's a discussion, I think, for another day. I think what Margaret was trying to get across there was if you have if you're expecting succession, as it were, with younger sibling following older sibling, if the older sibling is getting transport to another school based on transfer from a faith school to another faith school, will their younger sibling be getting the same entitlement because of the usual expectation that they would follow? I think that's what Margaret is trying to get at.
Okay, apologies for misunderstanding. The answer to that is we will only provide transport to a Church in Wales school for those people currently in Llanbedr should the proposal go forward and the school close. We would then have to consider whether transport is available to siblings on a case-by-case basis after that.
So you would commit to the existing pupils, and then siblings coming through later, it would be through the appeals process, and the fact that this school has been closed and their sibling has gone into that school and they're following on would be the grounds on which an appeal could be made, whether it's accepted or not. Wyn, can you make a note of that in our report to Cabinet, that commitment has been given so that it is in front of officers and can be relied upon by parents if they find themselves in that position?
Sorry, I think we just need to clarify what we've just committed to there, just to differentiate. So can we just have the words from Marianne rather than?
Okay.
Is that okay?
That's fine.
Sorry, just because I think it is an important point, and I just think we need to make sure that we get it right. Okay.
If any parent wishes for their child to access a Church in Wales provision, should Llanbedr school close, then we would consider providing home to school transport using our discretionary powers as council, but on a case-by-case basis. And also that would only apply to the pupils currently in Llanbedr school. If siblings, if they're granted transport and then siblings follow on, we would consider transport for siblings on a case-by-case basis following the appeals process. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
So,
it's important that it's the commitment to consider, isn't it? Yeah, thank you.
Emma, you've been trying to come in for a little while.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to draw Scrutiny's attention back to the numbers and where you were referring around the capacity and the Church in Wales capacity in particular. And obviously the figures that Marianne has given you are as of today, or the latest information that we have. But earlier on, Marianne referred to the additional capacity that we're anticipating in the wider area by 2023. So just to be specific on that, Llangattock Church in Wales School, which would be the nearest in-county Church in Wales School to that of Llanbedr, whilst as of today doesn't have the full capacity for all Church in Wales, of the pupils that attend Llangattock Church in Wales, 28 pupils are in year 5 and 6. So by the time, because there's lead-in time with any proposal, and there are a number of steps that we have to go through, and without predetermining anything. So, for instance, if we get to a point whereby Cabinet approve following this scrutiny to move forward to statutory notice, and then we go through that process, and even beyond the statutory notice, get to a point of agreeing to close Llanbedr School, there's that lead-in time of another year, which will see the throughput of some of the pupils that are currently in a potential receiving school. Of course, what we're doing there also, in terms of where you're asking for the full church places, is we're making an assumption that everybody attending Llanbedr goes because it's a Church in Wales school. I'm not 100% sure that is the position. And Chair, please forgive me, but I will give you the same breakdown for Llangors, which is the next closest in county, because there will obviously be a number of children moving on from year 6 into secondary provision that will also free up capacity in that area. So where you made the statement around 25%, actually, when you take into account the lead-in time and that transition from primary to secondary school, that statement isn't correct. So I'll come back to you, Chair, with the Llangors figures, but I've just asked the team to collect them now because I don't have them to hand in front of me.
Thank you, Emma. Councillor David and then Councillor Sandra.
Thanks, Chair. Listening to these figures, you know, there are statistics and
David, your reception is
lies and all the rest of it, and you just very difficult to. I'm doing my best, Chair. I don't know what more I can do.
No, I was sorry.
What is
I may be having problems, or you may be having problems. It was breaking up for me. I don't know whether it was for others. I'm getting nods. If you can go with camera down rather than camera up, there'll be less bandwidth coming up, so you'll stay clearer to us.
Right, I'll give that a try. It's, as I understood what Emma Palmer was saying now, because some pupils will have left existing schools, leaving capacity in possible receiving schools over the next couple of years. But I presume that nothing stands still, does it? The pupils will be entering the possible receiving schools at the same time, because they will be having pupils in their own area coming into the school. And I wonder if somebody could give me any idea. I don't know this area at all well. What has the pupil numbers been like over the last 10 years or so in Llanbedr? Have they gone up? Have they gone down? Is it a thriving community? Is it an aging community? Can we have a bit of a clue as to that, please?
Yeah, just really quickly, I think it's important to touch on the comments that were made earlier that, you know, that as of currently in the sort of catchment, we have over 90 places available, whereas by 2023 there'll be over 140 available places, which shows that of all of them receiving schools that we're discussing, there will actually be more capacity going forward rather than less. I'm sure officers might want to pick up on that as well, but obviously the report does contain a lot of the information in terms of pupil numbers within going forward, but historically, I'm sure Marianne can comment. Thank you.
I'm grateful for what Councillor Phil says, but I did ask specifically about Llanbedr School.
Yeah. Historically, I'll just come back on this one. So historically, the pupil numbers in Llanbedr have been roughly around they've been in the lower 40s. So going back to January 2014, there was 39 on roll, and they've increased 41, 40, 39, 43, 42, 46. So we do acknowledge that at the moment, with 49 pupils on roll, they're at their highest for a number of years. In terms of, do you want to know the other ones, the other schools in the area, just have a flavour of the general?
Yeah, well, it's Llanbedr that we're talking about, isn't it, today? And it's more important, I think, that we understand what is happening in that community. But please, by all means, do give me the other figures if you have them, yes.
General trend, looking at this now, so general trend is downwards and has been downwards since 2014. So Crickhowell has gone from 242 in 2014 to 192 2020, and now they're down to 188. Llanbedr remains relatively stable. A bit of peaks and troughs. 112 in 2014 went up to 137 in between years, and then has fallen to 116 in January 2020. Llangattock remains in the same sort of ballpark, so 108 in 2014, little bit of an increase, and then again remaining the same, so 103 on roll currently. So that's the type of that's the type of flow in the Crickhowell cluster anyway.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Councillor Sandra, Emma, I note what you're saying. I'll bring you back in a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I might, first of all, thank the officers for the report. Loads of information and lots for us to get our teeth into to read, and lots of consultation as a result. But if I might refer to something that I found missing from the information that was shared with us, and that is where the children actually come from to Llanbedr. Mention was in the report that there are some children from out of county that attend the school, and that if children were to walk to their local schools, they would be able to do so. So I'm assuming that they do come from further afield than Llanbedr. And I can understand the choice that parents have in a Church of Wales school. But when we looked at the changes in the Estrogynais area, we were presented with, and I'm sure that Councillor David Jones will remember this, we were presented with some very graphic photographs of the 11 schools in the area, and they showed the schools and they showed where the children come from. And to be honest with you, a spider's web had more of a pattern to it than where the children came from. It was really intermingled. And the reason being, because of the communities, grandparents would be having their children dropped off to them, and they would be taking them to their closest school rather than where the child was living, because that was easier for parents, and that's how things have evolved. So I would be very much interested to see how many children actually are from Llanbedr and where they do come from, and I think that would put a better picture for us all to see. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Sandra. Marianne or Emma? Actually, Emma, do you want to take this and then go into your the Llangorse info?
Yeah, I haven't got the information, Chair. I'm trying to scramble to find that through.
Sorry, I must have seen an earlier comment that said you had Llangorse numbers.
Sorry, it's a different. So I'll cover off, Marianne, if you can pull, we've got the data in terms of where the children are going. So, Councillor Sandra, just please bear with me just one moment.
No problem.
The comments that I put in the chat, Chair, where I said earlier I would obtain the Church in Wales numbers for Llangorse. What I can confirm is in year 6 in Llangorse, so whilst today the school might be full, in year 6 there are 20 pupils. So by the time, again, with all the caveats, if Cabinet got to a position where we were in the final stages of this and they decided to close the school, there are 20 places, there could be 20 places based on year 6 transitioning to secondary provision. So that's 20 in Llangorse, which is the second closest Church in Wales school in county, and the 28 in terms of year 5-6 in Llangattock, which is the nearest Church in Wales school in county.
But both of those, Emma, assume that there are no pupils coming from their catchment areas into the school.
If in terms of ordinarily, the majority that we see coming in terms of from the catchment is normally from reception up, but I do accept that people do come in at different stages of their life if they've moved into the area. I don't think you have 20 pupils.
You're saying that 20 are leaving in year 6.
Yes.
That assumes there's nothing coming through in the pipeline and that there's 20 spare places, because there's no pupils in year 1 from the immediate catchment.
Yeah, no.
So to say there's 46 there coming in is
not
necessarily accurate.
Yeah, there is the transition through the years, and normally people will follow that transition for their childhood, wouldn't they, in the particular area?
Yeah.
There is some change between schools, but
so there's 20 going out, but there might be 20 coming in at the bottom end.
Yeah, in terms of the reception.
So for you to say to me that there's 20 spaces in Llangorse in the transition and 26 in Llangattock is not actually an accurate figure.
What I'm saying to you is that these are the number of pupils that are in year 6 in both those schools, whereas your assumption earlier was on the basis that there wasn't that capacity. And what we've also been saying to you is the population and the projections, which has been for some years, the last 5 years, we've seen a decrease in the overall population, and particularly in the younger age. And that is set to continue based on the information that we have from ONS and our local intelligence. So the figures that we're considering today in today's report is not necessarily what we'll be faced with on at the time, if Cabinet get to a point of making a decision about a school closure. That said, it can move either way, can't it, in terms of increase or decrease, but the trajectory has been decreased based on what's happening in the population.
Okay, I understand that. You're expecting there to be fewer year 1s coming in than year 6s going out. What do you have the projection on what the likely numbers in year 1 is at that point, or is it too far in the future to have something?
It's at the primary school age. Some children will be born as you move through, and you'll know from your background that can be challenged. So hence why we look backwards over what's been happening. There's more certainty when you do transition from primary to secondary school, because we know about the children in the main in the county. But with the projections are available publicly as well on the CLASC information, where we've been using that now we've made it available publicly in one place for the last 3 years for 2019-20, and we've literally this week just pushed out the 2021. So we can refer to that as well if needs be in respect of where we where we think the projections are specifically for the Crickhowell area, but I'd have to look at that whilst Marianne continues to answer some of the questions.
Okay, thanks for that, Emma, and sorry for interrupting you. I'm just trying to get
No problem at
clarity
all,
as best possible.
Yeah, no problem.
Marianne. You're mute at the moment, Marianne.
Apologies. Yeah, wrong button. I'm just going to go back to Councillor Sandra's comments, if that's okay. You did mention a spider's web, didn't you, in Ystrad Gynllais area before the reorganisation. It's something quite similar here in the Crickhowell cluster. So we did send Councillor Pete a spreadsheet with the chosen versus closest school scenarios for the area, which does show there's a lot of people choosing choosing schools that aren't their closest schools. So there's a lot of that going on here. But in terms of Llanbedr itself, 38% of the pupils currently in Llanbedr attend Llanbedr as their closest school, so 38%, right? So around 61% of the pupils currently attending Llanbedr school actually choose to travel to Llanbedr school to access the school. So 61% live closer to other schools, if that makes sense. And then we've modelled it to see what would happen if, of those schools, I just mentioned the schools, so the schools are Crickhowell, Llangynidr, Llangattock, Derryview then, which is in Abergavenny, and then Llangors as well. And we've modelled it to see what would happen, what would the impact be on the pupil numbers, etc., where they would go once if the school would close. I'm just scrolling down. So if there was no school in Llanbedr, 61% of the pupils would now be closer to Crickhowell Primary. Then 13% would be closer to Derryview, 11% closer to Llangynidr, 9% closer to Llangattock, and then 1.9% closer to Llangors and another out-of-county school, Llanfihangel Criconi. So that's how the patterns would change should Llanbedr close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Marianne. I appreciate that. I think it's important to bear that in mind when we're considering the information in front of us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm going to go back to you, Jake. You asked the first question and we've spiraled away from you. So carry on with your others.
No, that's absolutely fine, Pete. And I do want to just at the end come back to some specific up-to-date numbers as well on the school, because we've had some updates in correspondence that's been floating around recently, and I'd just like some accuracy on that at the end. So we'll come back to that. But thanks for the opportunity to say a few words, Chair. I find the scrutiny process increasingly difficult. We're dealing with some difficult issues. And I'm somewhat conflicted and confused, really. Our role today is to test the recommendations of officers going forward for Cabinet approval and to see whether they're sufficiently substantiated by evidence. And it's that evidence that is beginning to trouble me increasingly as I've gone through this report. And I have spent hours going through all the papers in detail. Our vision is of providing all our children with high quality, inspiring education. And that's unarguable. Indeed, the first guiding principle underpinning the transformation process in education in Powys is to provide a world-class rural education centred around learner entitlement. Now, I'm not actually sure what that means in practice, as we've been doing over recent weeks. It's the smaller rural schools which are currently being targeted for closure. Principally, it seems due to cost. Financial sustainability is the term which is used, and not educational excellence. Indeed, paragraph 2.4 in essence suggests we improve learner entitlement and experience by rationalising, that is closing, rural primary schools. So that seems to be built into the process and it seems unequivocal, and that is worrying. The difficulty I have with our role in scrutinising the proposals to close Lambetta School is that the only reason St Peter's has come forward for consideration outside of a comprehensive catchment review is because it is an outlier in terms of cost per pupil. Now, of course, cost is important in whatever commodity we purchase, but so are quality of provision and experience, and of course, outcomes. When looking last time at Dolly School, I asked how the evaluation criteria were ranked and weighted. And although I didn't receive a definitive answer, I can clearly see that in respect of Lambetta, the sole driver is cost. It was in February when we considered that, Cabinet considered that report. And despite the consultation exercise, it remains the case today, with none of the other arguments being substantiated or able to stand the test of scrutiny. So I'm not sure where this leaves our process today. I've read with care the consultation responses and was taken in particular by the minuted discussions with teachers and governors and the lack of evidence justification offered to support a case for closure based on class sizes, teaching the new curriculum, the learner experience, extracurricular activities. Indeed, not only were apposite questions seeking evidence avoided, but it was conceded by officers, and I quote, that this is a very good little school, and quote again, working effectively as a cluster. And what it all comes down to is that the extra money per pupil going into maintaining these admittedly high standards was inequitable, taken on a county-wide basis. So it's not surprising then that there is no hard and fast evidence to support the cited reasons for closure around combined class sizes and leadership. If officers have such evidence, then I would expect to see it contained in the reports, whereas what we have are assertions that things would generally be better in a larger school and that in any event, the learner experience won't be any worse. I would hope that officers will agree that all they can realistically say is could and not would. Could generally be better. Where we are talking about a particular school rather than schools in general, your evidence has to be specific, fact and not opinion. Teachers, parents, pupils and governors should expect no less. After all, closing a school is a big decision and it is important to be absolutely honest about why it has to close, rather than dressing up assertions about learner experience and school performance as unarguable fact. If such evidence exists, and I have not seen it, then officers are invited to provide it today. So, if all we can reasonably focus on are low pupil numbers, in absolute terms that is, and not relative to the size of the school, it would be reassuring to know that the numbers being quoted in the report are now correct, even if those included in the consultation document were not. I say this, as what I was referring to earlier, as because I've received a copy of a letter addressed to the chair advising that there are currently 55 pupils attending the school, with 4 more due to start after Christmas. Please can you confirm what these numbers, and can you also confirm the adjusted cost per pupil now and post-Christmas, if you agree with these numbers, and what impact this has on the suggested £101,000 a year saving? Finally, I would like to know the average cost per pupil of all small schools, that's all those less than 91 across Powys, pupils, across Powys, rather than all primary schools across Powys. And because I think it's important to fully understand what we're looking to achieve as we review schools one at a time, unfortunately, how many rural schools will need to close to reach an acceptable level of world-class provision and transformational financial savings, given the current and estimated Powys pupil numbers that we've heard Emma talking about. Really, I want to know what the details are, what the outcome is we're aiming for, and where we actually stop on this conveyor belt of school closures at the point where we have made acceptable savings. I really have no sense about where we're going in this process, what the triggers are other than cost, and where it's going to end. So I know that's a bit broad ranging. I said I was confused, and I am, and I apologise for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jake. I've been listening to what you're saying there, and I'm picking out a number of different strands. I think it would be helpful if we take each of those in turn with members joining in and asking questions. I picked up a question around small schools and education standards and ability, and I think that is a big discussion, and it's the one that I think we probably need to focus on in some detail today. But I'm also picking up on the cost questions, and I'm picking up on what are the actual pupil numbers there. And I have seen the same reference, and I think it relates to preschool provision. And I know another colleague wants to pick up on that. So let's start there. Let's have what are the numbers now, and where do these figures that the school are suggesting come from? And then we'll have a little discussion around the cost per pupil and that aspect, and then we'll come back to education. So I don't know whether that's a Marianne, Lynette, or someone else first on that one. So unmute yourself, whoever wishes to speak.
I'm happy to come in first there if you like, Councillor Peake.
That's great, Lynette.
On education, or did you want to bring that in at the end?
I want to do education at the end. I want to bottom out these numbers and focus on finance.
Okay, so Marianne and Mary, if you can come in on the numbers and the finance, and then I'll come in for the education.
Okay. Thank you, Lynette. Yeah, so in the papers that you have, there was an error around the current pupil numbers. So we've clarified that in an email sent to Councillor Peake earlier this week. Just to say, on Teacher Centre, as of today, there are 49 pupils in Llanbedr School. 4 of them are nursery-aged pupils. So just to say, so 49 in total. We know that the school have confirmed with us and told us that they're expecting another 5 pupils in during the academic year, because they're responsible for their own admissions, and they can come in after the 4th birthday rather than wait until the September after the 4th birthday, like the council's admissions. So on that basis, 49. If the 5 did join the school, we would see an increase up to 54, which would be the highest in terms of Llanbedr pupil numbers for a long time. Just to add as well, one more fact for you: the capacity of the school is 57, so they would be then quite close to capacity. So that's where we are with the pupil numbers. So Mary's going to come in, I think, on cost per pupil.
I am, yes. So obviously, as pupil numbers increase, then and funding wouldn't necessarily, because of the current formula, because it funds in steps of classes of 30. So then the cost per pupil does come down then to round about so 4,300-ish, 4,320. So it comes actually much closer to the Powers average then with that many pupils there.
Mary, I'm looking at the appendix which you supplied to us with cost per pupil.
Mm-hmm.
If you're confirming that that's going to be 4,320, that puts them as the 46th most expensive school.
Yeah, it would make, yeah, it does make quite a difference.
It's a substantive difference, yeah, as you say, because of the steps.
Mm-hmm.
Bearing in mind at the moment, the 8th most expensive school is a school Cambano,
mm-hmm,
which was only created within this term of the council. It's slightly concerning. I can't really quite find the right word for it. it does significantly alter the phrasing that this meets the target, as it were. It's almost smack bang in the middle of cost for primary schools, bearing in mind we've got 90 of them. Jake, you want to come in, and I believe Bryn wants to come in as well.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. I mean, basically where I was going with this, I mean, it looks to me that, I mean, that's just a game changer in terms of cost. And, you know, having read all the papers here, the only factor was cost. And if now the cost average is the average, and not even of small schools across Powys, those less than 91, but average of all primaries across Powys, surely there can't be any justification to highlight this and take it out to close the school. It's certainly in advance of any area-wide review within the catchment. I mean, to me, it just seems like it's a complete game changer. Now, isn't that what we're meant to do by way of scrutiny, to look through the facts, to analyse that, to bring 4 points, and then with these game changers, make sure they are presented accurately to the cabinet, so they make decisions, proper decisions, based on what we know up to the minute.
Marianne, I'll let you come back. I know Bryn wants to come in.
Just quickly, just want to clarify a couple of things there. The cost is one factor. So you've seen from the documentation the challenges facing Llanbedr School, which cost is one factor, cost per pupil is one factor, low pupil numbers is another. Leadership is a challenge due to the head teacher having significant teaching commitment, and mixed stage classes is another factor. So I think when we consider the future of schools and when we review schools, we have to consider all the issues in one. So it's not just cost is a factor, it's all interlinked. And I think once Lynette starts to talk about the education aspects, you will see that it is all linked. So small schools, high cost per pupil, low pupil numbers, mixed age classes, the educational element. And I think Lynette can explain a bit more, but I just wanted to clarify that and make sure that people understand it's not just about cost per pupil.
I think we understand that, Marianne, and we wouldn't be here if we didn't. I think the key point, though, is that the current round of proposals have been highlighted as being brought forward outside of wider area reviews on cost grounds. So the educational views may be the same, and Emma's shaking her head. There's just so many different statements floating around as to why these schools have come forward at this time. It's quite a difficult one. Emma, I will let you come back in. Bryn has been gesturing for a little while. If I bring Bryn in, and then your comments may link with what Bryn's saying as well.
I was just going to correct.
Okay.
Okay, hang on. Okay, but Emma, go ahead if it's quickie.
Sorry, Councillor Bryn. This wasn't identified as a priority in terms of cost. When we're looking at, and we've said this in other scrutiny programmes as well, from a strategic perspective, there are a number of things that we need to unlock across the county in order to deliver the transformation programme. So because it's so complex, there are so many different variables that we need to look at what is possible in the elements of some areas, wider area review. We need to do everything in its entirety. Complexity we've talked about previously in respect of Callan Cymru, and we're saying that that's a really complex area that we need to resolve, and so we're moving in terms of informal engagement in that area. I know we've spoken about that previously, so I won't take up time. Llanbedr, we've looked at this, we've looked at Churchstoke area, Castle Crimean, etc. And the element that is really important around the transformation here, and all the factors that Marianne's referred to, the elements that are in the strategy, the guiding principles, that as an organisation, we signed up to the strategy, and that strategy was developed after extensive engagement with this, what I call the schools community, members, staff, parents, children, governors, anybody that wanted to contribute, and we were listening to their views, and we've got to stop protecting the past in terms of an 18th century infrastructure, and we've got to focus on the future and make sure that we can provide 21st century education and an infrastructure that allows those children to flourish. And that's really important, and ethos in terms of that world-class education. The educational element is really, really important. I'm not equipped to talk about that I'm not a professional teacher. Lynette and others on the call are, and they'll come in. But there are variables right the way across the county, and the complexities. And we can't tackle absolutely everything overnight, and we can't do everything in 1 year. It's a 10-year programme. But we do need to address and bring the proposals before yourselves and Cabinet to make decisions. Chair, the fundamental thing here is that there won't be one area left untouched in respect of the transformation, but you have to start somewhere. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Bryn.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. There's. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy with the notion of, small schools. It makes it, the pupil experience is obviously it can be good if you've got great staff. If that's not the case, the experience can be very, very different. And we need to design a school system which is good for your average member of staff, not just good if you've got brilliant members of staff, and that's where you gain with a little bit of scale, gives you more flexibility, more robustness on school organisation, and I think that's I concede that point very firmly. The other question, Jake raised the point of there's 4 or 5 extra pupils would make a massive difference to the financial cost per head, but these would be coming in at the nursery stage. So the question is, are we actually comparing like with like? Because the nursery figures aren't included in the majority of schools in Powys, and if those figures were to be included in every other school in Powys, I think you'd see a massive change again in other school figure numbers. Is that something that Mary or Lynette can enlighten us upon?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Councillor Bryn. If the nursery figures for all the other schools, then obviously were added in, then the Powys average would move as well. I don't have the nursery figures for all the other schools. I'm not able to do that calculation on the hoof, as it were. But it would, obviously it would impact as well.
And just to say, we don't fund those nursery figures.
Okay, Jake, do you want to come back in, and then I'll bring you in, Phil, afterwards?
Yeah, I do want to come back in. I haven't made those figures up. I specifically asked to be provided with the figures so that we at Scrutiny and Cabinet could make decisions based on the figures. So I don't know, I don't know what Mary gave me, but she just gave me some new figures. I think this comes back to my point about evidence. At some point, we need to know what the evidence is around school numbers. And I'm not here as an advocate necessarily of small schools being better than big schools or vice versa. I'm not doing that. All I'm saying is, if we are making decisions to close on numbers, then let's have those numbers in absolute terms and financial terms. And if we are making a decision to close a school about quality, and I hear what Bryn says, that it's the same argument that officers have made. Generally speaking, larger schools can offer a greater range, etc. Specifically speaking, that isn't the case here it's not been evidenced that that's the case. The head teacher, Mrs. Green, I think her name is from reading the papers, has done a tremendous job with the new curriculum, indeed is leading in the cluster as I understand it, in sharing experience there. So we do seem to have another little exceptional school here that is doing really well, and officers have said that. Now, if this were coming to us because it was a failing school at this point in time, hugely expensive, deteriorating building, and failing our children in terms of education, you know, absolutely go for it. That should be set out in the criteria. But to simply say bigger is generally better when you're closing a specific school, I think is unreasonable, and it's not evidenced. And I think that's where we're going to fall up. You know, we're going to trip ourselves up if we're not careful. And that's what I'm seeking. I'm not seeking generalities or platitudes. I'm looking for hard and fast evidence. I'm hoping now I'll get some of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jake. Councillor Phil.
Sorry, Chair, I just wondered whether we could actually start talking about education.
Phil, I'm quite happy to talk about education, but the criteria on which this is closed also includes finance, and that's what we're covering at the moment.
It does. It just, I'm just, you know, we've done, it's now 6 minutes past 3. We've got 54 minutes left, and we've got, you know, used the majority of the meeting already to discuss the same element. I just think, you know, that there is more to scrutiny than just the pupil number element. I think we'd established what the thoughts are of a few members of scrutiny very early, based on scrutiny numbers, on pupil numbers. Just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phil. I'm going to move on to education now, and I'm going to move on to it by way of a transitionary question. It's been indicated that there is a cluster review scheduled in wave 2 that would suggest decisions coming out and implementation probably finalising in a 3 to 4 year window. We're now looking at pupils, if this closure goes ahead, who will be moving into another school, and then potentially as part of the area review, might be moving into a school that itself is going to close. So I'd like some comment on the educational impact on those pupils of potentially not just going through a school closure once, but going through it twice, and would have to ask the question, should we not be reviewing this entire cluster, bearing in mind we're talking about only 4 schools, as one item rather than one and then going again in 2 years' time?
Sorry, again, Chair, just to make the point that we're talking here about a consultation, about a proposal that potentially may see Llanbedr be decided to close and follow the recommendation that was in the report. However, I think, you know, I'm just trying to ask the point about, I think that there's officers that can talk about the educational elements that you're discussing, and at the minute it seems to be that we're deflecting away from them rather than actually getting to that point that we would like to be scrutinised on, is why we think that this report does make sense and the recommendation is the right one.
Respectfully, Phil, I've just asked what is the educational impact on,
on the potential change of school, again, in a further potential consultation, potentially further down the line. What we are here to discuss the very issue that is happening in the paper that is in front of you. Apologies, Chair.
Phil, with the greatest of respect, your officers have said in this discussion that the area is in wave 2, which is imminent. Therefore, the impact of this closure may be added upon. And I'm asking the officers, what is their opinion on the impact of this closure, followed by another closure, if that were to happen in the further consultation, and asking them whether it is actually wise to go ahead with this closure when there is a consultation imminent. That is very much about the educational side. And I'm awaiting with interest the response from officers in respect of that.
Can I go first, if that's okay? And but I would like Lynette to come in on the wider educational impact as well. As Emma mentioned earlier, we have signed up to a strategy to transform the whole of the county. Part of that strategy is that we're committed to the 13 localities, and we have a vision to develop all age schools in all 13 localities, backed by significant capital investment. That is our ambition. It's not even an aspiration, it is our ambition. So all catchments will be reviewed in time with that aspiration around the all age in mind as well. Crickhowell, we have said we would start Crickhowell in wave 2 of a programme. Wave 2 starts in 2022. So we program it in so for later in 2022 when we could start that review. From experience, area reviews can take a long time to be seen through. I know Councillor Sandra is on the call. She's been through this. Area reviews also, if we don't know the outcome of any area review when we start an area review. However, we do know that we do need to improve the school's estate. So capital funding will be part of all our area reviews going forward. So that's in order to meet our aspiration. In order to address some of the issues around equity across the system, we needed to have moved and started to look at the smaller primary schools earlier on, because area reviews do take a long time to be seen through. So really, we need to address this proposal for the reasons that we stated in the consultation report, for the reasons in the consultation document, for the educational reasons that Lynette will come in on, and we need to do that now. The outcome of whatever happens in the Crickhowell area review could take 5 years, could take 10 years to be achieved, even longer. But we need to address the inequity in the system as soon as we can. In terms of the issue around pupils maybe at risk of having to move twice due to a school reorganisation, it's not something that can be. We can't guarantee that any pupil in any school in the council won't be subjected to a school reorganisation process as this goes forward. We do try to ensure that pupils don't have to move more than once in their school life. However, we cannot guarantee that won't happen. So does that give you a bit of an explanation about where we are with the Crickhowell area review? And we recognise what you're saying, Councillor Pete, about the risk, but we think we need to address some of the small schools first before we then commence with the wider area reviews.
Thank you for that, Marianne. Lynette first, and then I'll bring Angela in.
Yeah, thanks. There are a few aspects I want to pick up, if that's okay, Councillor Pete. One is around the move to other schools, and from my own experience as a receiving school for small schools that were closed in a few years ago, the transition is highly effective. We make sure that we support those transitions to other schools, and those children settle generally, from my experience and the experience of other head teachers in other schools, well. And so that, from my experience, is effective. And as Marianne said, you want as little movement as possible, but just to say that everything is planned very well for those children when they are transitioning to a new, usually larger school. In terms of evidence that has been asked for today, we're aware that the new curriculum is going to be started in 2022. That's when the new curriculum starts. Our schools are currently in the process of developing their vision for the new curriculum, of designing the new curriculum, and it is a very different curriculum that is going to be bespoke for every school. So every school will design their own curriculum, and it will require significant professional learning for staff across the local authority. Just to make it clear, we're not saying that it can't be done, but for all primary schools, and we will support, as a local authority, all our primary schools, because all our primary schools will have to deliver by 2022. What we are saying from our own professional judgment and into this report that you have in front of you today are qualified teachers, not just myself, but other people. As Eirik Towns is here today, Hayley Smith is here today. They are outstanding professionals in the teaching profession who have a clear understanding of what teaching and learning and good pedagogy looks like. And in terms of the planning that will be required for the new curriculum, obviously for us, it isn't here yet. But from my own experience and from the experience of officers on the call with me who are qualified teachers, planning for a curriculum, the more staff that you have, the more expertise that you have, the more subject area expertise that you have in your team, the more effective that curriculum planning can be. In a smaller school, you have less people factually, less staff factually, and less people to undertake the role of planning that curriculum factually. As I said, those are the facts. The new curriculum is different to the curriculum we currently have. The curriculum we currently have is prescriptive. The curriculum we're going to have will be one we have to design. And as I say, if you have, and as Councillor Jake has said, I know making generalisations, but in terms of schools where there are less staff, the workload falls heavier on the shoulders of that person. And if you have, and as we said, I can see it in the chat as well, a leader who has to lead their school, they've still got their school development plan to write, they've still got their self-evaluation plan to write, they've still got to monitor standards. And so the leadership at that school, who are often teaching as well, often carrying a few subject areas, which has been prescriptive in the past and is now has to be designed. Factually, it is going to be possibly more of a challenge, and small schools will need more support, which of course, as a local authority, we will give. Having said that, in terms of the school we're looking at today, Llanbedr, correctly, the leader of the school currently is an effective head teacher currently, and has been the lead of the cluster. And therefore, as a system leader, she's also been chair of the primary catchment. She also works with us in the local authority for a few days a week as a challenge advisor. So the current head teacher has been instrumental in her wider leadership within the cluster. And as a result of that, the cluster working there has been effective. And it has been necessary because of the sheer fact, factually, once again, as I say, designing your own curriculum, planning your own curriculum it falls on less people in a small school, and the leadership as well, the workload implications, the teacher workload implications that are possible. So that's sort of educationally where I come from. The new curriculum, as I said, has to be designed at each school individually. So it is a workload for smaller schools. I know that in the past, we've been asked in scrutiny around, what sort of size school would the local authority says, would be ideal for the new curriculum. We can't say that. All I can say to you is there are 6 areas of learning and experience in the new curriculum, which will be on the 4 core purposes. The areas of learning and experience are weighty areas of learning and experience. That's what I can say to you. In the past, we've had core subjects, which have usually held more weight than the foundation subjects as we have it now. However, in areas of learning and experience, that's a new part of the new curriculum as well. So there would need to be those enrichment activities. There needs to be a broader curriculum, more emphasis on the arts, creativity, all of that. It's very exciting. And obviously we will be supporting our schools in that aspect. In terms of evidence, the evidence that we do have in terms of teaching and learning, the Education Endowment Foundation, which is a global evidence base of how effective teaching and learning is, clearly states, and I'm happy to quote the evidence base of the Education Endowment Foundation, clearly shows that small classes or small schools is not a big factor in improving teaching and learning. In fact, some of the things that are high aspirations, high level questioning. There are a number of things that come in that evidence base that shows really what it's about is teaching, effective teaching and learning, and the size, smaller classes or whatever isn't the main issue when it comes to effective teaching and learning. So that evidence there is clear for us to see. So yeah, if anybody, I think I've covered everything there. If anybody wants to come in, I know we've got other officers who are teachers who've inputted into this report, Eirig or Hayley. Have I missed anything there that might be beneficial for Scrutiny to hear? Or have I covered most of it? Is that all right, Chair?
That's fine. Yeah. From my perspective, it's a good introduction as to where you're thinking about that. There's a couple of things that have stuck in my mind that I will pick up upon, but I'm going to open it up to colleagues first. And Angela's been wanting to come in for a little while.
Thank you, Chair. Like Jake, I find myself very conflicted also. And as you know, Lynette, I've been on Scrutiny a long time now, perhaps too long, some might say, I don't know. I've had 4 children, as you know, educated in Powys, 2 in a very small school, 2 in a larger school. So I'm not predisposed to support either, because I feel all 4 of my children were fortunate enough to have a good education and have gone on to do well for themselves. But the problem I have here is, while I hear what you're saying, and really it makes sense, I believe you, I trust your word, but I do not believe this document gives the evidence that you're implying that it does. So, for example, the very beginning, page 4 of the document, we talk about the aspirations, and they're fab. I mean, I really don't think anybody could argue with those that Powys learners will have a high quality, inspiring education, all of that. Of course, they deserve that. And point 2.3, there's a whole list of bullet points there. Totally agree with that. But I still don't find in this report where it says that this school, let's keep it to this school because we keep going over all here about Powys schools, but this meeting is about one school. So where is the evidence that this one school isn't delivering that? Because we can read the Estin inspection and you might be concerned. All areas are good, apart from 2. I was concerned that standards and teaching are adequate, whereas the surrounding schools, standards and teaching are good. So that might be an issue of concern. And yet this head teacher in this school is leading the other schools in their cluster. So clearly there's no worries about the capability and quality that this head teacher is able to deliver. Otherwise, why is she leading other schools that have a good? So there's too many things that do not add up. And also, we've been told for years that the financial aspect is a challenge for Powys. We know the situation of the county. We've been told many times that financially we are spreading our butter too thinly, or money, too many schools and not enough money to fund them. And Emma has put in the chat here about the fact that this £101,000 saving that the closure of this school is going to provide. But there's nothing anywhere within Powys's documentation that says this money will stay in school service. So you can close 10 schools, but if that money doesn't retain within the school service budget, it does not make a jot of difference financially to the other schools, other than the fact that they might gain a few pupils. But the overall position for each school remains challenging. So closing one school does not help another. So I'm really conflicted here. Where is the evidence to back up closing any school?
Thanks, Angela. I've got hands from Emma and Marianne, or Lynette, do you want to come back?
Shall I just come back in first on the first point you made there, Angela, in terms of the head teacher as it stands at the moment and the Estin report. The Estin report, it goes back a while now, and the head teacher who's there now was not in place at that time. And so obviously as part of the consultation, we go back to the last Estin report. But from our perspective, yeah, the leader at the school now is an effective leader, and I would not argue with that at all. The issue is not about the leader there now, it's about the fact that, you know, it's one person that is actually making, and it's back to Councillor Bryn's point. The issue is, you know, the one person, if you've got somebody in the school perhaps who's effective or whatever, it's that one person that has to bear that load, work that hard, and be with those children sometimes for 4 years. And so, you know, we've got to look outside the fact that it can't be just reliant on the one person, is my point there. So that's my point around that aspect there. And the Estin report, as I say, is historic, but it is the most recent one that we have. I'll hand over to Emma. Yeah.
Emma or Marianne, whoever comes in first speaks first.
That's then Councillor Pete. No, I was going to pick up on the wider strategic element that Angela referred to. I just wanted to reiterate to Scrutiny that overall the financial envelope for education in Powys is sufficient. And when we do the comparisons, we've had recent comparator data on a national level. Powys actually, we're above the Welsh average in terms of funding education. Okay, that there's evidence there that has been released from government. But the issue that we have is the equity, and you've heard me say this before. So whilst in certain areas it depends, I suppose, how you cut the cake, isn't it? Some are having a fatter wedge of the cake, and others are having a slimmer wedge of the cake. And what we're trying to do is to, with everything that's just been said in terms of education and pave the way for excellent education, we also need to address the equity element. We also need to address the fact that our infrastructure, as I've said, is set up for an 18th century education, not a 21st. We need to use the ability of 21st century funding to underpin and enable 21st century learning, and really take this opportunity to support the new curriculum and what's before us in terms of the exciting opportunities for the teachers and the children. But as an organisation, when we're looking at this, yes, we're talking about a proposal today, but when we're looking at this as officers, we're looking at it from that strategic perspective, right the way across all of the children across the county, all of the revenue funding, all of the capital. And we're also, as you know, we've got our 10-year programme. Now, when we look at that 10-year programme and we're looking at how the 21st century funding can assist this, Marianne's already referred to 13 all-age schools in the area, so we can make sure that there is access. We must remember that when we're talking about this particular proposal and everything that has already been said, we're not talking about alternative schools being 20, 30 miles away. We're talking a number of alternative schools being 3 miles, 5 miles. We're talking, and again, factually, from an ONS, Office of National Statistics, so not even a Powys prediction, Office of National Statistics, year on year, we've seen a decline in the number of pupils attending schools in Powys. So we can either support education in the estates that we have, noting that that's going to cost more overall, noting the challenges from an educational perspective that places on the teachers and the support mechanisms around them, or we can have change, and we can make change, and we can reduce the infrastructure, we can make sure that it's fit for the future, we can make sure that we're putting the revenue funding that we need to, and quite rightly so, into the education of these children going forward. So I just wanted to make those points around the strategy, that whilst we're talking about individual schools here, we also have a responsibility for all the children that don't go to Llanbedr school. We need to think about those individuals. In different meetings, we're being challenged around why certain schools in very close proximity aren't getting a greater share of the cake. They can only get a greater share of the cake if we make changes across the county in order to rebalance the size or the portions of the cake. I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thanks, Emma. Marianne?
Just a quick one, back to Angela, really. I think in the consultation report, I think we try to articulate as best as we can, really, what Lynette has explained around the educational aspect. Section 1.3.1 is where we start with that. And I think if there's any, I'm not sure how much more we could actually put in a consultation report to summarise what Lynette has said. But I think if you look at the reports, that it's in there, we explain why we feel that the educational aspects would be beneficial in a larger school in terms of the curriculum, in terms of mixed age classes, etc. I think it's all in there. But if it hasn't come through clearly enough, then please tell us, and we'll try and address it in future.
Thanks, Marianne. I'm going to go back to Jake, then Bryn, then I've got a couple of points if no one else wants to come in at this stage.
Thank you, Pete. I mean, I do hear very, very loudly what's being said. I mean, Emma saying it's about equity and referring to cake. So, Councillor Phil, this is why we've spent some time talking about money, because that's the terminology we're looking at. And that's why I, at the outset, said it was very important to understand what the actual numbers are and the actual cost, and to see whether this school is an actual burden upon the average or it's not a burden on the average. And I asked the broader questions about where we pick on schools in terms of that median cost to to know what we're highlighting. So it's been repeated, although earlier on it was indicated that the costs were much lower than we'd previously been advised. We've gone back to talking about this school being a burden on the rest of the school structure, and the comment about 21st century learning and the opportunities, you can't disagree with that. But what you haven't demonstrated is that actually is not what could be delivered in a school where the leader, and you were emphasised very clearly, Lynette, oh yes, that's the person we happen to have at this moment in time, implying that she might not be here tomorrow. And of course, things do change in schools. And if this were a failing school, and it were a failing school now, I'd have no difficulty with the conversation we're having. But but it isn't. It's a school that we've said criteria. It's a school. It's a school that's delivering and has good leadership, and seems to have the capacity to deliver that. So there are exciting opportunities for children in the existing school, and you shouldn't imply that those opportunities. And the reason I'm so pedantic about it is because I do worry that as a council, it might be attractive for us to take some shortcuts to get to the strategy we want. It's easy to think, right, okay, we've got to make some savings, let's chop some small schools, and then we can readjust. And that would work. That's not a bad strategy. The problem is, where do we stand when we're actually looking at individual decisions about individual schools, such as we are now, in relation to the rural code, for instance? Will we be being misled? I mean, I'd love to agree with you. I think it's absolutely right. But by being rolled over by your argument and not providing challenge back, would I be doing my role for scrutiny in not saying, hang on, look out here, we've got to make sure we've jumped over every hoop possible around this school at this point in time, not about some panacea in the future. And that's my worry. We're closing the school now on the basis of what we know now. and I just feel it's a bit unsafe. That's, you know, and that's why I'm putting such a struggle up with you to make sure that you provide the correct advice to Cabinet so they make the proper decision. Okay, I've probably said enough.
I'm going to bring Bryn in first and then respond, because that really was responding to what officers are saying rather than asking more questions.
Okay, iawn, diolch yn iawn. I think Emma, probably mistakenly, but I think it's a very relevant mistake, if it was a mistake. She referred twice now to the 18th century model of education. Now, I'd be delighted if we had the 18th century model of education in Powys, because you're going back to the 1700s, late 1700s, when Griffith Jones Llanddowror was providing a system which ensured that Wales was the most literate country in the UK and in many parts of Europe as well, with a system of schooling which employed the local language of all of Wales, and the children, the pupils and adults at that time were educated through the medium of Welsh, all the way through Powys, Gwent, Montgomeryshire, Radnorshire, and there was about 3,000 of these little so-called hedge schools set up in the 18th century. That would be a great place to go to. I think what Emma was referring to is the 19th century schooling system, which we're stuck with the architecture of the Victorian model of education, which people like Matthew Arnold and others deliberately described the Welsh language as a scourge of the population, and designed a system to deliberately eradicate Welsh from the medium of education and from the population. And I'd be delighted to go on as long as some others on this point. It's an extremely relevant historical fact. However, bringing us up to the modern period, and I'd like to get beyond the 20th century first, which has happened in other parts of Wales. I'm talking about Gwynedd, Ceredigion, Carmarthenshire, and places like this, and Cardiff. What is completely missing from this strategy, and I hope that all these reviews are supposed to be strategic, and I'm going to forget about specific schools, but think about pupils now and what education outcomes these children are going to have. There's no consideration of Welsh medium opportunities for the children from Llanbedr, Llangata, Crickhowell, in any of these areas. If we're talking about strategy, we've got to talk about 5-10 years down the line, and we can't wait 5-10 years for none of the children, another generation of children to pass without the opportunity to receive a world-class education. And I'm using the term advisedly because most children in the world are fully bilingual, and English is picked up, easily spoken on every inhabited continent on the planet, whereas in our particular continent of Powys, it's barely available to 20% of the kids here. Where is the strategy in the long-term, medium-term and short-term future for any of the children in this catchment area to achieve some degree of fluency in the language of their country?
I'm going to build on Bryn's question there, because it is one of the areas I'd highlighted. The WESP does highlight the Crickhowell cluster as being a particularly challenging area. We only have 4 schools. If we're looking at putting a Welsh medium stream or Welsh medium school in place, is there not potential, just as there is potential elsewhere, to look strategically at whether Llanbedr offers that opportunity? I know you've looked at it in passing in the report, but the report says we don't even know if the teachers have the ability to do that, which says it's very much been looked at in passing rather than given serious consideration.
Can I come in? Is that okay? Yeah. Right. In terms of Welsh medium, diolch Bryn am godi pwnc. Just to say, in our West, we have identified a number of areas where we want to develop provision, and Crickhowell being one of them. Now, just to explain, in Crickhowell cluster, we have no Welsh medium provision, no dual stream provision. We don't have a Cylch TFE and we don't have a Cylch Meithrin. So we're at a very, very basic level in terms of developing provision in the Crickhowell cluster. When we go forward, once we've got the WESP approved, and then we'll develop the action plan, we will, as part of the Crickhowell cluster review, we will be looking at how we deliver Welsh medium in the cluster. However, at the moment, it's too early to say what that will look like, because we will have to do the work. It's probably, it's very, very early days in terms of, we need to make sure that the early years provision is there to begin with. And so we need to do a lot of work in the community around assessing demand, facilitating demand, etc. And I'll go back to what I said previously as well in another consultation. When we plan for the development of Welsh medium education, new Welsh medium education, we would start with in areas where there's a critical mass. We wouldn't start in areas which is, you know, not accessible maybe to the majority of people. So we'd look at the towns in particular. So that's our thinking. We will be coming to Welsh medium education, and I know we have looked at it as an alternative option in the consultation report, but we've got a lot of work to do in terms of Welsh medium education in the area, and it will take some time, but we have highlighted it as a priority in the first 5 years of the WESP. One other thing to take into account as well is developments across the border in terms of Welsh medium in Abergavenny, which could have an impact as well. So we need to look at the wider area, so to speak, not just the cluster, but what's happening around the borders as well. So yeah, there you go.
Bryn, come back.
Yeah. So is when you talk about looking where there'll be a critical mass, you'll be looking in every area where you're most likely to be able to generate a critical mass. So there is a kind of, you've got an implicit guarantee there that you'll be creating some kind of Cylch Meithrin in Crickhowell, I guess, to cover that catchment area. Yeah.
You need to look at the central. Yeah, you need to look at the central points. You need to look at where the population is, and start there in the middle of those areas, and think that's the approach that all local authorities take when developing new provision, because we obviously want to sustain the growth, don't we?
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that it's accessible to the majority of people. So
that makes sense. Okay. I hope we can use the same principles when it comes to secondary education in the north of the county. But
nicely woven in, Bryn.
Yeah.
I'll let you get away with that one. Just I'm going to bring us back because that was an area we wanted to explore. I'm going to bring us back to this educational standards and small school type issue. Lynette, in what you were saying was you couldn't say what the minimum size is of a school to deliver. Geraint, when he was with us, inferred quite clearly that he believed that you needed one teacher per area of excellence so that the teachers could develop and not be overloaded. I'll give you the benefit of saying a teacher or a teacher and learning assistant to cover that. That tends to suggest that you're going to need 6 teaching staff within a school to deliver. Now, I'm not sure that's what you're saying, but it is what some people could interpret.
No, I think I can.
What do you think the minimum is?
Okay, so I think I was asked that question. I think it was me rather than Geraint, I have to say, and I think Margaret asked the question in a scrutiny before. Margaret Evans asked me that, and I think I said, well, you know, ideally you'd want one teacher responsible for every area of teaching and learning, which is obviously 6. Now, you mentioned their teaching assistants. They cannot be in charge of an area of teaching and learning, and so an area of learning and experience cannot be taken on board by a teaching assistant. It's not in their terms and conditions. So as it currently stands, if we look at the curriculum as it is now, we have a number of subjects, English, Maths, Welsh, Science as core, and we have the foundation subjects. And in small schools, it is usual that staff have a number of subject areas of which they have to produce schemes of work, etc., etc. You know, it's in a larger school that is currently shared out. So you have as well as that, you have opportunities for progression for staff to take a leadership responsibility. So in a larger school as well, you know, as I say, you'd have perhaps a head deputy, and you have teaching and learning responsibilities, TLRs as we know them, and often it's a progression for staff along their professional pathway as well. So what I'm saying is, in terms of areas of learning and experience, there will be 6. There are going to be 6. Schools are already working on them. In the school that we're talking about today, which is Llanbedr, where there are I think 2.5 teachers, and I know the head teacher has a teaching commitment. It is probable that each of those members of staff have 2 areas of learning, if not 3 each. And so that's what I mean when I'm saying, you know, in terms of the teaching and learning, the leadership opportunities, you know, having 6 people or 5 or 6 people to take an area of leading and learning and experience is beneficial for the workload, but also for the development of the teaching profession in terms of leadership going forward. So size school, we have, there's, you know, as I say, it isn't according to the size of the school. Just for your information, if you wanted to know, there are 37 primary schools in Powys who have 6 teachers or more. We have 11 schools where there are 3 or less teachers in a school. But like I said earlier, and I just want to reiterate that, is we're not saying it can't be done. I want to make that clear. What we are saying is that the amount of work to prepare for the areas of learning and experience, I reiterate it again, in terms of the new curriculum, in designing those areas of learning and experience, in us ascertaining the progress in those areas of learning and experience, and in terms of assessing those areas of learning and experience, will all take professional judgment and high quality teaching and learning. So, you know, as I say, I've gone around quite general there, Councillor Peake, but that's really, and it was me who said, you know, initially, ideally, it would be good, you know, it's a heavyweight. One area of learning and experience is going to be a lot of work designing the curriculum as well, supported, of course, by the clusters and the local authority. We won't be leaving schools alone to work on this. We'll be working on it with them.
Okay, so we've got some clear guidance there that it will be a challenge for these smaller schools.
I think rather than challenge, just to take the word there, I'm saying they will probably need extra support in terms of leading those subject areas and more cluster working. So that's what I'm saying there in terms of the developing the curriculum in smaller schools will need to be cluster working for sure, and will need support from the cluster and from officers. Okay. As with larger schools as well.
We've had successive education ministers saying that the national curriculum can be delivered in small schools. I think you've said the same thing there. I'm just looking at the comments within the meeting between officers and the staff meeting, where there was recognition that this was a school that looked able to meet that challenge. The comments are it's around the quality of the school, not the size of the school. And there's been recognition throughout the reports, and recognition by the fact that the head is leading the cluster in new curriculum development that suggests that this school is capable of meeting the new curriculum. You've also got comments within there around the breadth of the out of school activity, and and you've got comments there about concerns amongst parents around whether that will be available to them if they move to other schools. So I have to put the question back to you, with all of this praise for this school, surely this is one of the small schools that is capable of meeting this challenge in working very closely with other schools within the cluster. So on that basis, your arguments are, there is a challenge to those arguments from within your own comments about the school in discussion with school and governors. So I'm struggling to understand whether your arguments actually are met in respect of this school.
Well,
in a way that I wasn't challenging you when we had these discussions at Corinian, for example. There is evidence here that they can deliver the curriculum.
I don't think we can say that, Councillor Pete. So I sort of come back at you now, and I think in the chat here, you know, Angela thinks that I clarified some of the points here. I actually think the delivery of the curriculum is going to be something we've got to work on in the next year. In terms of, if we go back as well, going back to our transforming education vision that we've got, it's really clear, particularly at the end of our document, in terms of the personas that we put together there, about the kind of entitlement that we want for our learners moving forward with the new curriculum, with the 4 core purposes, the areas of learning, the more enriched curriculum, the more enhanced curriculum, the broader curriculum. And actually, evidence shows, again, from the Education Endowment Foundation, shows that for more able children, for example, the more teacher subject knowledge and expertise there is, the better those children do. So I'm not saying that, you know, there isn't expertise, but by actual virtue of less people, if we take the new curriculum with the arts, the creative, the music, the sport, for example, if I was a head teacher in a school now, in a small school, yes, I could offer music, I could do that well, not particularly good at sport. And, you know, all of that kind of thing, the more expertise that you have, and I'm not saying it's not in this school at this time, but what I am saying is when we look at our transforming document for 10-year vision, it's really clear that we want to have 21st century schooling where children have a broad experience, learning and experience, enriched curriculum, and have that area of expertise, which is clearly founded in evidence based in terms of teaching and learning and pedagogy. It's really clear that subject knowledge and people having those talents, and we haven't got them all, nobody has. So what I'm saying there is, you know, in terms of delivery of the curriculum, you know, it is, you know, I'm not saying that we don't know whether schools can deliver it. We're still working on it, but it will be, as I said, in terms of planning for it, you know, they are chunky areas of learning and experience, and that enhanced provision, the after school clubs, which you mentioned there, the broader curriculum, you know, the bigger the range of people you've got to draw from in terms of that talent pool, if you like, the better.
Thanks, Lynette. Jake, you wanted to come in. I'm mindful that we've got 7 minutes left and we haven't touched on the community impact yet.
Quickly then, Lynette, thanks for that. You're not saying it's not, I'm using your words carefully, you're not saying it's not in this school, that's capacity and expertise at the moment, but you're also not prepared to say that it is, notwithstanding that's, you know, where we seem to be with some of the evidence. And you imply that, and I can't remember the number, so please do remind me, you say basically there are X number of schools across Powys with less than 3 teachers, and that those schools would all struggle basically to deliver the curriculum, because it has to be a general, we're using generalizations, and when we've demonstrated that this is actually a very good little school and you're saying it's going to struggle, then surely all of those X number are going to struggle with less than 3 teachers. And I started by saying, you know, what's the scope of this thing, this equalization across Powys, this transformation? How many of these little schools are we going to close and before we decide enough is enough?
Marianne, you seem to have come in very quickly there. Let's keep questions and answers very quick now so we can get through a few in the last 5 minutes.
Just to support Lynette, really. There are a number of small schools. You can still see from the cost per pupil spreadsheet that's in appendix to the papers, you can see how many we have, how many small schools we have. Yes, it's going to be a challenge. But when we come to looking at each catchment, as we will going forward, there are a number of factors that we have to take into account. So the issues raised by Lynette about the curriculum and small schools is one thing, but we would also have to look at local factors, as we do for every school, in terms of their geographic locality, their language, all kinds of different things, accessibility, etc. So when Councillor Jake, you're saying, you know, your question really is about, is this a blanket approach to closing all small schools? I would say, you know, the educational arguments are there, but we do have to look at each individual circumstance on its own, on a case-by-case basis, and look at how that catchment then operates. So you have to look at the sort of all the different connections between the different factors. I hope that explains it. So it's not a blanket approach, but we will have to look at individual circumstances.
Sandra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, but I will have to offend Councillor Phil Davis at the moment, because I do have to mention finance, because it does really evolve around finance. When we're looking at Powys and the amount of money spent per head per child throughout the county, that is not equality. And if every child had the same amount of money placed on his or her head throughout all schools, there would be a vast difference throughout the whole of the county in what could or could not be achieved. And we're miles away from there. When we went through the process in Ystradgynlais, we had 12, not 11, but there were 12 schools in the area. One died a natural death because people came out, as they have now, very forceful. We've lived through this, we've experienced it on more than one occasion. Every parent in that hall was shouting, and it was bitter. It was terrible, the atmosphere there. And they all said that they were going to continue taking their children to those schools. The very next day, Mr. Chairman, the majority of those parents went out of county to the nearest school to see if there was a placement for their child. And they also went to Brecon because those were the nearest schools in the area. And the school closed a natural death because the parents removed the children themselves. So I know what it's like to have a threat of closure of small schools. We've lived it, as I said, we've experienced it. We had 11 schools left, all different sizes, all different conditions, all different grades, and they all closed. So it affected everybody equally throughout the community. And we do know the effect that it's had on some of the communities without a school, and there has been a big difference. And yes, people say it's the heart of the community, and we all feel that. And we've all got historical emotions and feelings because our great-grandparents or whatever were going to those schools. And it's not just the building, though. We have to think of the future of these young children. And I'm asking you to bear on equality. You've seen the figures there. And when you look at the top amount of per head, and we're looking just at this one, £6,010 per head per child. And then if we look at the largest schools, that's near a half, not even the average per head per child. We are going to face new challenges with this curriculum. We do need money thrown at us to help to get us through this curriculum. There will be changes, there will be need for new resources and all sorts. And unless we've got parity, how are we going to move together? And in the S-Time report, it condemned Powys for not picking up the gauntlet and making ruthless decisions. And we are politicians, and we all want to save our communities, and we all want the best for our communities. But let us take our hats off for a minute and consider the children and their futures. And we really need to think, what are we going to put in place for those? We need parity, we need equality, and we need progression. And it's time that we looked at the whole situation in the bigger round and start facing the facts. And let us look at what we can do and provide for better for the children in the community. I'm sorry to say this, but I feel that we really need these decisions to be made quicker and sooner rather than later, because unless we really sort it out, unless we sort it all out, we are never going to move forward. And Powys will be, like with the lights, we will be the black area in Wales. We will be the central area where our children will be going out of Powys to get their education because it will be better elsewhere. Let us start being realistic and make the best of children and put Powys on the map as being good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Sandra. You made an excellent case there for the benefits of catchment area reviews, and I think we can all endorse that. Phil, you came in, you wanted to come back quickly. I'm aware that we're at 4 o'clock.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. I think, I think what Councillor Sandra did was more than just make a case for catchment reviews. We're not against catchment reviews, as you can see that they're in the forward work programme within Waves, etc. But, the other thing that Councillor Sandra's touched on there is absolutely spot on, and she hasn't offended me at all by saying it's about finance. I agree with everything that she has said, and I think we do need to look at the bigger picture, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to provide them education opportunities for the benefit of everybody in Powys, and we are looking forward. We are not standing up and looking for the status quo and looking to be politicians and gain votes by doing so, for in whatever reason that way may or may not be. But I just wondered, Chair, if we haven't heard from every member of Scrutiny, and I just wondered, is silence a sign of support for the paper from the members that we haven't heard from, or how is what is felt by other Scrutiny members today by the balance of the report that is in front of them?
David, come in. I was, when Sandra had finished, going to ask if anyone had got any comments who hadn't spoken. So
I wouldn't like the cabinet member for schools to say that my silence is acquiescence or agreement with this proposal. I think if he listens carefully to what Councillor Sandra said, she spoke about the benefits of a whole catchment review, not picking off a lame one along the way, or what he perceives or somebody has perceived to be a lame one. And nobody can point to me to anything wrong with Llanbedr School. So I don't agree with what he said. Please don't misinterpret my silence as agreement.
Councillor Lucy, you wanted to come in quickly and just observe something.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, it was just I noted in the report that Estin had picked up on the concern about the lack of alternative nursery provision, certainly for the number of hours that is currently provided by Llanbedr School. And I wondered whether that was actually an opportunity that we were missing in terms of perhaps some Welsh provision. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any comments?
I'll comment, Chair. It seems you've made the just come back on it. The other thing that Councillor David just touched on there, and it's Councillor Sandra did make the point regarding catchment reviews, but she did also make a very strong point that these decisions need to be made faster and quicker for the benefit of everybody, and that is what we're trying to do. And that's what the officers are putting in front of me, and that's what I'm enabling them to or trying to enable them to do, and trying to take the politics out of it, because that's not what I'm here for. I'm here for the benefit of everybody. And apologies, David. I wasn't referring to yourself. I think we'd heard from you earlier on in the meeting. It's just there's a lot of people that haven't spoken. Was what I was trying to say. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Phil. Eirik?
Yeah, just to respond to Councillor Lucy, I think that refers to the fact that the school, being a voluntary aided school, can actually take pupils in from the age of 4 and offer them a full-time education, whereas in our settings, we can only offer up to 10 hours of education up to the statutory school age. So there would be that mismatch then between what the pupils can actually have in nursery provision at Llanbedr and what they would get if they went to a setting for similar age pupils.
Yeah.
They would, of course, have that potential if they ended up at Llangattock as another voluntary aided school.
They don't actually, sorry, no, Llangattock don't operate that. They have a separate setting, an independent setting of the school. So they don't operate the same system as Llanbedr. Even though they are also voluntary aided, they have gone down a slightly different route.
Thanks for that.
No problem.
Yeah, I was just prompted by Councillor Phil's comment that some people hadn't spoken. I haven't spoken. I've listened with intent. The problem I have is that so many of the arguments that have been put forward today were the arguments which we were absolutely raising when we put this strategy together. Those arguments were answered, and officers today are doing their level best to answer them. We as Scrutiny have to ask the necessary questions, but the difficulty is that strategy is set in stone. This is what we're following. So we're reopening those arguments again for as one individual specific school. And I just think it's irrelevant. The strategy is there. I thought Emma has delivered that strategy, the explanation behind that strategy so well today. And to be honest with you, I've heard her do that probably a dozen times. And all we are doing is asking the same question with each individual schools. We as councillors have agreed this direction. The school service has agreed this direction. So in some respects, I find it so difficult listening and answering to the questions. And some of the councillors today, we've made big, long speeches. We've heard them before, and that's why I haven't spoke, because I find it so repetitive, and I don't see us going anywhere if we don't follow the strategy. Yes, we have an importance of scrutiny to pick up if we're not following that strategy, but I don't see it myself. So that's my opinion.
Thanks, Gwynfor. I think the key point with each of these proposals is that we have to look at the strategy, and we also have to look at the rural schools policy. And one of the things that we agreed as Scrutiny with officers is that we would examine the issues around the rural schools policy, which means we do have to quite often explore the same sort of questions each time to ensure that all of the different strategies that are at play are actually being followed and that the interplay between them is relevant. Emma.
With all due respect, Chair, we have had those discussions, but we also have had discussions about the value of scrutiny over the same points on every single proposal, when we have indeed already had the strategy agreed by the organisation. And as Councillor Gwynfor said, I have to agree, we are actually delivering the strategy we're trying to. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Does anyone have any final comments? I'm going to finish off with a final question, which I hope will gain some short answers. The community impact assessment has quite a few poors or very poors on there without much mitigation. Are you looking at providing significant support to the community to help them mitigate some of those risks, assuming that this closure goes ahead?
Can I come in there? Just to say, really, mitigating against the negative impact on the community from a school closure, I think requires a council-wide approach. So it's not an education service-led approach, but it's about working with the regeneration teams, all the other teams, departments within the council, if there are initiatives out there that we can tap into to support communities, then that's something that we would want to look at. So However, having said that, I'm not sure it's an education-led matter, but it's something that we do need to engage with our wider service colleagues about once we know where our school proposal is headed.
I think that's a positive response. And I think I would hope if we have similar impact assessments coming forward with similar comments on in the future, that there might be some comments from other departments in there showing how they will be taking on the support of those communities. Because I'm aware when we talked about Dolly and Castle Corinian, because of the very close ties with the village hall, which don't appear to have come across in this proposal in quite the same way, there was support promised from that side. And I think it would be beneficial to see some of those other parts of the authority coming through with propositions to give the community some indication that there is some support coming.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay.
In which case, if no one has any other comments, I would thank the officers, the portfolio holder, for their time today and for their comments. We'll thank you and look forward to seeing you with the next proposal coming forward. I'm not sure what we've got coming next, because Craddock is going to be delayed for a period of time. I'm not sure what's happening with Churchstoke.
Okay, we'll discuss this outside the meeting if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Which reports are coming to which cabinet? That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And thank you, it's Lynette, Emma, Eirik, Mary, Hayley, who we've seen a couple of times but haven't needed to call upon, and Sarah.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, dear.
Thank you for that. And you had get back to the committee. Have we lost a couple of committee people?
I think you might have just lost Edwin. Oh no, Edwin's still there.
No, I
Yes,
think
you lost a few, Chair. There's a few leaving.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was trying to come in the very end, but things wouldn't work. Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay.
We lost David as well. Oh no, David.
Yeah. I'm not sure how we're going to move forward, because last meeting we had a discussion afterwards, and I was expecting to have a similar sort of discussion now. Wynne, are you able to get back in touch with members, or I'm sorry, I'm aware that we're still live, but I'm slightly struggling to work out how we're going to move forward now.
I can possibly try, but they may have gone offline completely.
Yeah.
That's the problem. I think the best option I could offer you, Chair, is that I pull together some notes, because I've got to do these for the Cabinet next week anyway, circulate them to you and then to the committee, and just see if there's general assent.
Okay.
Is it a possibility, Chair, that we can, shall we say, reflect and come back in middle of next week on this?
We've got to get this to Cabinet. Cabinet is next Tuesday.
Yes. So I'll have to write these tonight and part of tomorrow, so I'll get them out to you. I would hope, if all goes according to plan, by lunchtime tomorrow, you will have seen something, if not sooner. Just pulling all the points together, and then we'll take it from there.
Jake, do come in.
Yes, I mean, Councillor Peake, Chair, in view of some of the comments which were made at the end of the meeting, some of which were clearly targeted at myself, I do wonder whether I and other members require some further training about what it is in relation to this process we're actually scrutinising. So I can see that some members might be fed up that I'm looking at the detail of the school in front of me, and that will take us out to look at strategy, etc. But I was trying to concentrate on the school, and I do wonder whether, in light of those comments from portfolio holders, we're not getting it quite right. I'm not getting it quite right, and I'm very happy to have some further training and advice and guidance about how to effectively scrutinize these schools as they're coming forward for us to have a look at, because it is too easy to do nothing and say nothing. And my view on that is that we could end up getting ourselves in trouble as an authority, not this scrutiny committee, they're not our decisions, with the rural code if any of these do go to legal challenge, as is being suggested they might. So I'm very open to some further training.
David, I think you've put your camera on, which suggests you might want to be coming in.
Yeah, I did want to say something, Chairman. I think that, well, I thought anyway, that the scrutiny committee had honed in on the weakness of the argument. Everyone was asking, well, where's the evidence to justify that? And the evidence seemed to be pretty thin. Now that was where I kept coming back to. It's a system for the 21st century. Yes, we all want that, but where is the evidence that closing Llanbedr School is going to move Powys along that line? You know, Councillor Sandra spoke about what happened down in Ystrad, where there was a whole catchment review, and it was decided strategically where it was the best place to put primary schools for the future. Now, it's very difficult to actually predict the future, but, you know, people down give it their best shot, and I think in the main, they're pretty satisfied with what they got. Say, well, let's close Llanbedr School. It's a good school. The head is leading the catchment in all sorts of things, but let's just close it anyway, because it's part of our overall scheme. Well, that's not our overall scheme. Our overall scheme is to improve the quality of education, get education into the 21st century for everyone. And there was no evidence today to say that Llanbedr School is in the wrong place. You know, we wouldn't think of, if there was a catchment review, Llanbedr would be one of the first to go because it's in the wrong place. That argument has not come up at all. None of those arguments have come up. So I don't see why Jake should be reproaching himself. I mean, I didn't think he was getting anything wrong. He was putting some pretty detailed and well thought out questions, which I would have thought was scrutiny's job. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I have no problems with what we discussed today. I think the key position that I said right from the outset, scrutiny's role is a sort of Jiminy Cricket. We're a safeguard. We're looking at what is coming in front, and saying, have the officers proven their case? And almost offering a second opinion to the cabinet as a safeguard for the authority. And we've looked at that, and at times we've said yes, at times we said yes with caveats, and last time we've said no. So I think the challenge that's being put back to us, which is fair challenge, that we've gone through these issues before, that's right, because this is part of a wider transformation program, and we need to be mindful of that. But each individual school closure is an entity of in and of itself within the school's organisation code, and we have taken on the member role within that. So I don't think, Jake, you are off beam in what you were saying and what you were pressing. I think we need to be testing these, because a bad decision now is a bad decision now, and it's one that can't be undone. I'm not sure, I'm not saying that we've had any bad decision. I'm not judging that in any way, but I'm saying that's what we need to be looking out for. Lucy and Bryn, and then I think we'll draw this discussion to a close because there's not enough of us here to reach any specific conclusions. And then Wim will share with members that are left the forward work programme, and then we'll go into private session for reflection on the meeting. So Edwin, Bryn and Lucy, so Lucy first, then Bryn, then Edwin.
Yeah, thanks,
any reason
Chair.
why we're not in private session now?
No.
I just in that discussion about what we're repeating and what we should be repeating, what we shouldn't. I guess that when we're talking about whether small schools can provide the new curriculum, then that's something I accept there will be some variation in the abilities of different small schools, but I think we probably have repeated quite a lot of that discussion. And there are certain aspects of that which will stand, whichever school we're looking at. I'm not sure that we necessarily need to go through all that every time.
I'd agree with you on that, but I don't know what others felt, but I felt we, for the first time in this meeting, got more clarity and more evidence behind the thinking rather than just the thinking of officers. And that's something we've lacked in the past. I think that's why we've been kept going back to it. And I would agree with you. I don't think we necessarily need to cover that ground again, other than to look at whether what we've learned today applies across. Bryn?
Yeah. Well, first thing, apologies. I think Carol Davis was there. I didn't see it till the end, so I didn't know there was translation available. But anyway, made it quicker, I guess. Phil Davis said at the end that that Sandra was arguing on behalf of catchment area reviews, and they're saying they were not against them at all and they wanted them. But I don't know. I thought that slightly is at odds with the. I mean, it's up to the people who voted for the 13 catchment areas to justify what I think is a fundamental problem in many aspects of it on the catchment areas. But I thought there was a deliberate effort to avoid catchment area reviews on the because it was considered too difficult and traumatic process to go through, and just got everybody, whole regions, up in arms at once against the council. So is that a little bit disingenuous to imply that they were in support of catchment area reviews, or have I got the wrong end of the stick?
No, I will be fair to officers and defend them on this one. They have initiated a catchment review in the north, and they are looking at particular issues at this stage. So I think there's consistency in them saying that they're looking at catchment reviews. I think where I would disagree is that they should have been doing them first. On a principal level, they should have been looking at the whole catchment rather than looking at individual schools first. I think that's where you might have seen in the meeting some friction, particularly between Phil and myself. Edwin?
Yeah, that would be it. I think you're right there. Do it in principles, yeah.
Edwin?
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair. We had excellent presentations put forward, to be fair, by the officers today. And if we were like-minded, we'd have to support them, I feel. But I must admit, I find great difficulty in making decisions on these because, as Bryn put forward and Sandra earlier on, it's all about, there's so much more to take into account, the communities. And we are seeing communities dying within our areas, and cultures are dying. Quite often, sometimes, yes, schools have closed. There's been influx of people from away in who don't integrate with local people in so many ways. And then we are finding then that the language is dying. We are finding in Brecon it is very, very difficult to keep, motivate and grow the Welsh language in Brecon High. The actual Welsh class in the new Brecon High is very, very small. Children are going back to their Slavera area where it is more, there's more strength down there, and the culture is stronger. So I know I'm not helping, but I'm finding it very difficult to lean either way at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
I think all of us are struggling with this because there is a desire to bring about the best education.
Oh, yes.
I think that's without question. It's just the best way of doing it. And that's what we're struggling with.
Like
Sandra,
I said, I've said once before, sorry to butt in, we had three boys. They went through the local primary schools. There was, at its peak, there was 28 there. But they've all done extremely well, and so many others from it. It kept the community together, a strong community together. And I must admit, when asked what was the plus point of when they moved, shall we say, to Brecon High, the only thing they said they missed was the sports facilities.
Yeah.
You know, everything else they had.
Okay, Sandra, I'm going to leave you with the last word, and I'm going to ask Bryn to go through the formalities and then take us offline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I realised that you did say that there were 3 to speak, and then I put my hand up. Apologies for that, but I just wanted to come in and clarify for Councillor Bryn. When we had our catchment review, it was not an easy process at all, and I'm sure that Councillor David will remember some of the animosity and the fights, literally, that were going on within the community. We had 2 sisters who would not sit down at their mother's tea table to eat food together because they were from different schools, and they both thought their school should be the ones or the area where it should go. We had huge arguments. It got really nasty and very unpleasant. But what we tried to do was to bring the community along with us and to talk with them and explain to them why it was necessary, why it was needed. And when we told people of what was happening and why, there was a greater understanding. And I think that's the bit that is lacking. If people are if it's explained the reasons behind all of what's going on, then they can put it into perspective and they get better understanding. But I do really think that what was missing from that communication, the documents that we received, was that map. And Councillor Davis, I'm sorry to pick on you all the time, but you were there, you saw the process, you were part of the process in Nice when it was changed. And I remember you commenting on the pictures that were shown. They became so discoloured. They had they had 10 coloured pens to show where the children were going from and which schools, and you couldn't see in the end where they were coming from or where they were going to because it was so intermingled. And I think that's what's missing here. If we'd seen that, it would put into clarity where children are coming from, and we'd have a better understanding of why are they going there? What is the reasons? And if we could identify that, we can then pick some of the process as to why people feel that they need that particular school. Because let us be honest, a school is a school, and reputations do get out there, and people do talk to each other, and people do vote with their feet. So I'm not going to say any more than that, but I'm thinking that now is the chance. We owe it to our youngsters to make the best as we can. And one of the things that we thought that after we went through the process, that it would be evaluated and monitored. And I'm sure that that has been done somewhere along the line, unless our offices have been taken up elsewhere and that work hasn't been done. But we have got larger schools, and to my knowledge and experience, they are doing quite well. So there is evidence there, and I'm sure that that could be pulled out and shown and shared with others. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sandra. Wyn, could you just take us through the forward work programme as it stands? And I will say that this is subject to change because I alluded to before, it's not quite clear what the timelines are for Churchstoke School and Craddock School at the moment.
Absolutely, Chair. The next meeting officially we've got is the 8th of December. But as you say, that could be subject to change depending on what else comes forward. There's also been a bit of an update, which I spoke to the chair about this morning. There's a few other items to add it. So for the next meeting, I'll actually update it and give you a revised version of this, Chair.
Thanks very much for that, Wyn. And with that, I would say thank you and draw this meeting formally to a close. If you could just take us offline just for a couple of final minutes.